Alright guys, welcome to video number 12C. This is our continued discussion on fonts. In this video I will be discussing font sizing, which can be a little tricky if you don't understand some of the more basic concepts in fonts. As you may have seen, I've been using pixels here. I want to talk about that in a second. First I'm going to show you how to write out this property and this value, so you guys don't get confused later on. Okay, so the property we're going to be using to size our fonts is font-size, okay, followed by a colon, which we should know. I like to add a space here, although you don't have to have one there. I like to add one just so it's easier to read. And then I'm going to add my value. In this case it's going to be 24, and then the unit of measurement, in this case it's pixels, which is px, okay. And then end it with a semicolon. Notice there's no space between the number and the unit of value that I'll use, or the unit of measurement I'll be using, and then end it with a semicolon. Okay, so that's how you write a font size. In this case, it's pixels, and pixels are a absolute unit of measurement, meaning that when I say 24 pixels or I say 14 pixels, it's an absolute size on all browsers. 14 pixels is 14 pixels, and it's going to look the same across all browsers. And what that means is it's 14 pixels tall from the bottom of a letter to the top. So the bottom of G's and P's, the descenders, all the way to the top of this letter F over here. Okay, so that's 14 pixels tall, right here. That's my paragraph. Okay. Now, pixels, I like to use pixels on certain websites as a sizing option because it gives you the most control over the font, obviously, because you're setting it to an absolute value. So if you say, I want this paragraph to always look 14 pixels tall, you set it to 14, it's never going to change. It gives you awesome control for really like creative websites, any website really, but it's up to you. The problem with that is that Internet Explorer, when you go to change the sizing, so you can change sizes on your fonts through your view or through your tools, doesn't resize the font if it's set to pixels. It'll only resize it if it's set to a relative sizing, which you know, could be good or bad, but you need to consider who's viewing your site. I like to think of it as if my site is my portfolio site and I have very specific sizing I want to use, then I don't care about people resizing my size of the fonts. You know, I don't want them to screw up my layout, basically. There's ways around that, of course, but I just, you know, that's what I like to use. If it's a business site where, you know, people might need to resize it, or if you know your audience or people that have problems with their vision, or maybe senior citizens that use glasses, you may want to think about using a relative unit of measurement that they can size their fonts or resize their fonts to their liking. Okay? So that's, you know, just something to consider when you're sizing fonts, whether you're using absolute like pixels or points, although points aren't really used, or you're using relative measurement of m's or percentages, which is what we're going to get into next. Cut up. Alright, so I'm going to delete these, and I'm going to want a relative unit of measurement. And for that we need a baseline, because we need to make it relative to something. And if you remember when we talked about inheritance, things get passed down from parents to children, and the body is the ultimate parent because it's the parent to everything else on the page. So we're going to set a baseline for all of our fonts in the body, and then base everything else off of this. So I'm going to add a font size in my body. Okay. And I'm going to say 100%, and this is written the same as the pixels. Okay. Now, what does that mean? 100%. 100% of what? Well, the definition in those cases is that the font size set at 100% in the body is going to mean that the baseline for the paragraphs is about 16 pixels tall. Okay, so I'm going to set this in the body, and it's going to propagate through all my the rest of the website. Okay, so I'm going to show you the website here. I'm going to reload, and notice that they got bigger. That font size now is about 16 pixels for the content here, the paragraphs. Everything else, all my other elements are now based off of that. So my headers are, you know, a certain value above that. So my H2 is maybe twice the size of that. These paragraphs here. Okay, so this is 16 pixels. And then my main header and my subheaders are 2 or 3 times the size. So this would be twice the size, roughly. That's an H2. This is my H1, so it's roughly 3 times the size. Okay, so they're relative to that 100%. So I'm just going to type this out here. 100% equals 16 pixels. Okay, you don't need to write that in your CSS. I'm just writing it there so you guys can get it. a visual representation of that. So now that that's set at 100%, we can go and, based on that, change the font sizes for everything else. Okay. So my H1 now, I'm going to give that a percentage. I'm going to say 120% of that 16 pixels. Okay. And my paragraph will say, 80% of those 16 pixels, because my paragraph is the 100%, right? It's at 16 pixels, but I want it to be a little smaller. 16 pixels tends to be a little too big for most websites. As you can see here, that tends to be too big for you to write your content, unless you want it to be that size. So I'm going to say 80%. Okay. So what we get is roughly 18 pixels for my H1 and roughly 14 pixels for my paragraph or something like that. My H2s here didn't change in size because I didn't set them in my CSS, so now they're bigger than my H1. Okay, so something to think about. The actual size of the font doesn't matter. Alright, so what's the advantage to using this say over pixels? Why am I using percentages instead of pixels? Well, the reason you would want to use this is, as we talked about before, when someone resizes your pixels in Internet Explorer, they don't change sizes, okay? And even when they change in another browser, they're kind of arbitrary. But if you set things relative to each other, like we have here, when people go to resize things, or they have different size monitors, or they change the resolutions, or they just resize things in their settings, everything is going to change relative to each other. So my header is always going to be relatively, 40% bigger than my paragraph tags, and so on and so forth. Okay, because everything's relative to each other. So even if things shrink and get bigger, they're going to look proportional to each other. Okay, whereas if you use pixels, they don't. So just something to think about. Again, I'm going to leave this up to you guys when you go to write your own code for this. Okay, but mess around with it at home. See what you guys get. And I'm going to move on to the next unit of measurement here. Your other option is also to base this percentage off of a pixel. So if you set your baseline to say 10 pixels, I'm just going to choose a smaller number to show the differences here. So obviously my H1 will be about 12 pixels tall, and my paragraph will be about 8 pixels tall, and there you go. Right? Now my paragraph is super tiny. My H1 is not that big. Okay, it's about 12 pixels tall is what it should be, and 8 pixels tall for my paragraph. So you could base your percentages off of a different number, not the 100%, which equals 16 pixels. You can actually base it off of a absolute value in the body. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So I'm going to move on here, unless I had something else to say, which I don't think I did. I'm going to move on to a different unit of measurement, which is also a relative unit of measurement, which is known as ems. Okay, and I mentioned it in a previous video, and I'll explain to you what a measurement em is. So I'm going to write here 1.2 em. Okay, so what does the em stand for? Em refers to the size of the letter M when it's capitalized in that specific font. Okay, so 1.2 right now is basing it off of that 100%, which is 16 pixels. So it should be 1.2 size times 1.2 times the size of that 16 pixel capital letter M. Okay, that's really confusing when you hear it, but let's go just take a look at it. So it's 1.2 size times the size of the 100%. Okay, or my paragraphs now. So they're going to be bigger than 16 pixels. Alright, so I'm going to go test this in my browser. So I'm still talking about how it's relative to each other. So there we go. So I'm going to resize this. And there you go. Okay, now if you remember, this definitely looks bigger than 16 pixels. Okay, because it's 1.2 times the size of that 100% up at the top. Okay, so em is another relative unit of measurement that you can use for sizing your paragraphs. And ems are important because we're going to use ems, or you can use ems rather, to size all kinds of other things. You can size your divs, their widths, anything else. There's all kinds of things you can size with ems, and what it does is everything on your page is going to stay relative to each other as things get resized or don't get resized. Okay, so it's kind of a nice way if you can figure out the different relative measurements for everything. This is a really nice way to work. It's not necessarily the easiest way to work. Pixels, I think, are the easiest way, and you're free to use pixels. But ems are, almost a better way of doing things. In fact, I'll show you an article here at the end of this video that I'm going to have you guys read that talks about some tests they ran as far as what's the best way to set up your fonts across all browsers, and this is the best method with setting your baseline at a percentage and your tags individually in M's based off of that percentage. Okay, but again, it's up to you, however you want to do it.
Your divs, which we'll talk
All right,
about.
so I'm going to move on here to the next unit of measurement. Size. All right, so for this unit of measurement, we're going to be using keywords instead of units themselves. So we're going to be using a baseline. I'm going to set mine to small. Okay. And I'm going to just mess around with these things. I'll set my paragraph to a different value and the H1 a different value here. Let's go with, so small, if I just go to the baseline, I just reloaded my page here. It looks like that font size is about 14 pixels or so, which I think is what it should be. So I'm going to say my H1 is going to be larger than that, and my font size is going to be smaller than that. Okay. Now this is larger than the small, and this is smaller than the small, and this gets a little bit confusing, but basically I'll give you the ones that are valid. I don't even know that smaller and larger are actually valid ones anymore, but here are the ones that I have listed as valid. Extra dash small, no spaces, just the word small, which is what we use as our baseline. Medium, which you could also use as a baseline. Large, X dash large, and XX dash large. So those are the different units that are valid as keywords. Larger and smaller seem to work, but they're not in our I'm looking here at the list of the ones that are actually valid. It doesn't seem like it's there anymore. So what's the difference between these? The way you can think of it is each one is about 20% larger than the previous one, with the baseline that we set as small as 12 pixels. So from small you can jump up to medium, which would be 20% larger. From medium you can jump up to large, which would be 20% larger than medium. And if you went from small to extra small, it would be 20% smaller, so on and so forth. So it's another option for you in terms of sizing things, but up to you. The best way, according to this website, A List Apart, this website was created by the same guy that wrote the Web Standards book, and there's lots of cool articles that you can read through by different writers and different web designers. This one is How to Size Text in CSS. I'm going to go ahead and assign this to you guys as reading material. This particular one will be part of your homework, so please read through this. It's a quick read, it's only a few paragraphs, and you guys should understand what it says. But their conclusion is that sizing text and line heights in M's with the percentage specified on the body was shown to provide accurate, resizable text across all browsers in common use today. So what does that mean? Basically what they're saying is you should use a percentage specified in your body, which is what we did at first, right? That's what we started at with that 100%. And then base everything else off of that by using the M unit of measurement. Okay, so they're saying go with 100% or whatever percentage you want to use. You don't have to start with 100%. But it's just known that 100% is 16 pixels, and then everything else is an M size app off of that 100%. So this is, according to the Web Standards guys, is the best way
They did a number of tests across all browsers.
Again, I'm not going to dock you on your final if you decide you want to go with pixels. That's perfectly fine. This just happens to be the most user-friendly,
and it really
works across all browsers method, according to the people that are in charge of the Web Standards. Okay. So, study this, play around with it on your websites, try the different methods, see what works best for you, see what makes more sense to you. I know this isn't as easy to understand as you might seem, so I'm going to give you one more website here. It's the Elements of Typographic Style. It's webtypography.net. This one you do not have to read for your homework, but it's a really cool website. Just click on their table of contents, and basically it's like a few articles listing how they think web typography should work and how you should write it. Some of the stuff might be over your head because we haven't covered everything, but a lot of it you should understand, and as we move along with this class and you get more experience, all this stuff will make sense. But it's a really cool website. I'll add it to our class website, and
so according to them, this is the best practice
other values you can use with our fonts.